I have seen what you have done to my daughter. I have seen what you have done to my daughter.
If you touch her again, I will destroy this village. Even your king won't be spared alive.
But tonight, the ancestors answered her name. Okeke village fell silent at midnight. The drums that had been pounding for hours suddenly stopped. No one gave the signal. No one touched the drummers. They just stopped. The bonfire that had been roaring in the center of the square died out on its own, flames shrinking into embers without wind, without water, without reason. 300 people stood frozen, their breath visible in the sudden cold. And then they saw her shadow. It stretched across the ground longer than it should have, darker than the night around it, moving when she stood still. The village elders looked at each other. Their eyes said what their mouths couldn't. This was the sign. The sign they had been dreading for 23 years. Her name was Adanna. In their language, it meant father's daughter, but no one in Okeke village called her that. They called her the bad omen child. She was born during a total eclipse, the moment the sun disappeared completely and the world turned dark at noon. Her mother died 3 days later. The crops failed that season. The river dried up for the first time in living memory. So they blamed the baby. The elders forbade her from attending festivals. She could never step near the sacred shrine. Children were warned not to play with her. For 23 years, she lived on the edge of the village, in a hut her father built before he, too, passed away. She learned to be invisible. But the curse, they said, was always there. But the curse was never hers. 40 years ago, the village leader, Chief Okeke, made a journey to the city. He returned 3 weeks later, wealthier than any chief before him. He built new roads. He brought medicine. The village prospered like never before. But something else came back with him. The sacred relic, the awful staff that had been kept in the shrine for generations, went missing. The elders searched everywhere. They never found it. The shrine keeper at the time, a man named Adanna, tried to speak up. He claimed the chief had taken it. 1 week later, Adanna was found dead near the river. The balance was broken that day. And the village had been slowly dying ever since. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Adanna was the granddaughter of Adanna. Only one bloodline in Okeke village could communicate with the ancestors. Only one family carried the gift of sight, the ability to enter the sacred space between the living and the dead. That family was hers. Her mother, Okeke, knew the truth about the stolen relic. She tried to tell the village council when Adanna was just a baby. They exiled her instead. Okeke left the village on foot, carrying her infant daughter, walking for days until she collapsed from exhaustion and fever. A farmer found them on the roadside and brought them back. Okeke died that night. The story of the curse was created to silence the bloodline forever. If people feared Adanna, they would never listen to her. And the chief's secret would stay buried. But tonight, the moon turned red. Not the soft amber of a lunar eclipse. This was the red of fresh blood, thick and unnatural, hanging low over the village like a wand in the sky. The wind began to move in the wrong direction. It came from the shrine, pushing outward instead of inward, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of old incense and earth. Dogs that had been barking all evening fell silent. Goats stopped moving. Even the chickens, locked in their coops, folded their wings and went still. And then, something no one had seen in their lifetime happened. The animals knelt. Cows, goats, dogs, all of them dropped to their front legs as if bowing. The villagers looked around in confusion and terror. Adanna stood at the edge of the square, watching. She had come tonight because something had called her. A voice in her dreams. A pull she couldn't explain. She didn't expect to be welcomed, but she didn't expect what happened next. Nkem, our only childhood friend, the one person who had never turned her away, stepped forward from the crowd. Adanna smiled at her. Nkem did not smile back. She pointed at Adanna and shouted to the chief's guards. "She's the one. She brought this curse. Take her now before it's too late." The guards moved quickly. They grabbed Adanna by the arms, dragging her toward the shrine courtyard. She didn't resist. She didn't understand. And then the ground beneath them split open. The crack in the earth was thin at first, like a pencil line drawn across the dirt. Then it widened, deep and black, releasing a sound like a long exhale. The guards let go of Adanna and stumbled backward. She stood there, staring at the crack, and realized something. She wasn't touching the ground. Her feet hovered 2 inches above the earth, her body weightless, suspended by something she couldn't see. Chains had been prepared to bind her. They lay on the ground nearby, iron links thick as a man's thumb. Without anyone touching them, the chain snapped in half. The sound echoed through the square like a gunshot. The villagers gasped. Adanna looked at her hands. She didn't understand her own power yet. Half the village dropped to their knees. They pressed their foreheads to the dirt, trembling, whispering prayers and apologies. The other half ran. Women grabbed their children and fled toward their homes. Men stumbled over each other trying to reach the gates. The elders stood in a circle near the chief, arguing in frantic whispers. Some said she should be honored. Others said she should be killed before the ancestors took full control. Chief Okeke stood in the center, his face frozen in shock, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. And then, slowly, with a groan that sounded like stone grinding against stone, the shrine door opened by itself. No one had opened that door in 40 years. It had been sealed after Ezinwa's death, locked with iron and covered with clay. But now it stood wide open, revealing a room no one in the village had ever seen. The walls inside were covered in carvings, symbols, names, dates, stories of every priestess and priest who had served the ancestors, going back hundreds of years. And at the very bottom, freshly carved as if done yesterday, was a name. Adanna, daughter of Kayameka, granddaughter of Ezinwa, chosen of the ancestors. Her name was carved last. But the carving wasn't finished. The final symbol, the one that marked completion, was missing. Adanna stepped inside. The air in the shrine was thick, heavy, like breathing through cloth. She heard them before she saw them. Voices. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Layered over each other, speaking in the old language her mother used to hum to her as a baby. The ancestors were calling her. But they were also warning her. Power comes with a price. Not blood. Not sacrifice. Memory. If she accepted the mantle, if she became the bridge between the living and the dead, she would lose something precious. A memory that defined her. A piece of herself she could never get back. She would forget the face of someone she loved. And she would never know who. Adanna closed her eyes. She saw herself as a child, sitting alone while the other kids played. She saw the women turning their backs when she walked by. She saw her father's tired eyes, the way he aged faster than he should have because of the shame. She heard the laughter. The whispers. The word cursed following her everywhere. She had spent her entire life invisible, unwanted, feared. And now the ancestors were asking her to give up even more. To lose a memory. To lose a piece of love. Would it be her mother's voice? Her father's smile? Nkem's childhood laughter before the betrayal? She didn't know. But she knew one thing. She had nothing left to lose. She opened her eyes. And she accepted the price. The moment she spoke the words, marks appeared on her skin. Not painted. Not carved. They glowed from beneath, white lines tracing her arms, her neck, her face, forming patterns older than the village itself. Her voice changed. When she spoke, it wasn't just her voice anymore. It was layered with the voices of her mother, her grandfather, every ancestor in her bloodline, all speaking through her at once. The villagers outside fell to their knees. Even those who had run came back, drawn by something they couldn't resist. They watched as Adanna stepped out of the shrine, her eyes glowing white, her body radiating light. And then she spoke. And the real enemy was revealed. She pointed at Chief Okeke. Her voice echoed through the square. 40 years ago, this man made a pact. Not with us. With something else. He stole the sacred Ofo staff and traded it to a dark priest in the city. In exchange, he received wealth and power. But the pact demanded balance. For every year of prosperity, the land would take a life. Ezinwa, the shrine keeper, discovered the truth. So he was silenced. Kayamika, the last priestess, tried to expose him. So she was exiled and cursed. The bad omen was never the child. It was the lie. The villagers turned to stare at the chief. His face went pale. He stumbled backward, shaking his head. No. No, that's not true. She's lying. But the ancestors demanded judgment. Chief Okeke dropped to his knees. Tears streamed down his face. His voice cracked as he begged. Please. I was young. I didn't know what I was doing. I wanted to help the village. I wanted to be a good leader. Please, forgive me. The villagers joined him, their voices rising in desperation. Forgive him, priestess. He has served us well. He built our roads. He brought medicine. Please, show mercy. Adanna stood still, the light around her flickering. She looked at the man who had destroyed her family. The man who had let her live in shame for 23 years. The man who had turned her into a ghost. She felt the weight of mercy. She felt the pull of compassion. She hesitated. But the ancestors rejected mercy. The crops in the fields began to rot. You could see it happening in real time, green stalks turning black, collapsing into the soil like melted wax. The sky above the village fractured. Not with lightning. With cracks. Thin black lines spreading across the red moon like shattered glass. And then the spirits walked. Translucent figures emerged from the shrine, from the forest, from the river. Ancestors long dead. They moved through the square, silent, staring at the people with hollow eyes. The villagers screamed. Mothers clutched their children. Men backed against walls. 20 seconds passed, and the river began to boil. Another 20 seconds, and the wind turned so cold it burned skin. Adanna realized something terrifying. She was losing control. The power wasn't asking for her permission. It was choosing her. And it was choosing vengeance. Adanna felt the ancestors pushing her forward, urging her to let them take the chief, to let the land consume him as payment for what he had stolen. But she looked at the faces around her. The same people who had rejected her were now looking at her with fear, yes, but also with hope. They were terrified, but they weren't running anymore. They were waiting. Waiting to see what kind of leader she would become. Vengeance isn't justice. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Words she had heard as a child, words she didn't understand until now. She turned back toward the shrine. The ancestors' voices roared in protest, but she spoke over them. There is another way. She stepped into the sacred room and placed her hands on the wall where her name was carved. She began to rewrite the pact. Not with words. With intention. With will. The ancestors resisted. The walls trembled. The ground shook. And then she understood the cost. Breaking the pact could erase her existence entirely. Adanna stood at the center of the shrine. The ancestors surrounded her, their voices a storm of anger and grief. If you break this pact, the bloodline ends. You will be unmade. The village will forget you. Your name will vanish from the carvings. You will never have existed. She looked back at the villagers outside. They were flawed. They were scared. They had hurt her in ways that could never be undone. But they were also her people. And she realized that justice wasn't about making them pay. It was about giving them a chance to be better. She had a choice. Save the village. Or save herself. She stepped fully into the shrine fire. The flames were cold. White. Pure. They wrapped around her like silk, lifting her off the ground. The ancestors screamed. The light grew brighter and brighter until no one could see anything at all. Morning came slowly. The red moon faded. The cracks in the sky closed. The spirits returned to wherever they had come from. The crops stopped rotting. The river cooled. The village was intact. But Chief Okonkwo was gone. Not dead. Just gone. His hut was empty. His belongings untouched. It was as if he had walked into the night and never come back. The shrine was silent. The door was closed again. The villagers searched for Adanna. They called her name. They checked her hut. They searched the forest. They found nothing. Except footprints. Small, bare footprints leading from the shrine into the forest. And they didn't stop. They went deeper and deeper, past the boundary stones, past the sacred trees, into the part of the forest no one enters. The elders followed the prints for an hour before they disappeared completely. The ancestors were awakened that night. But they didn't come alone. And now, something walks in the forest. Something that remembers everything. Something that carries the faces of the dead. The villagers hear it at night. Footsteps. Whispers. Laughter that sounds like Adanna's, but layered with voices that should not be alive. They don't know if she saved them. Or if she became something else. What would you do if you were Adanna? Would you choose vengeance or mercy? Would you sacrifice yourself for people who never loved you? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, share it. Because some stories need to be told. Some names need to be remembered. Even when the world tries to forget.